For centuries, the skies of Limroft have been darkened by the great serpent Alvora. Every decade, Alvora swoops down, devouring wilderness and cities. Even the golden palace of Miser King Jared was swallowed up, leaving an empire in ruins. Alvora was an unstoppable menace. Until its body was discovered less than a month ago, hanging lifeless into a cliff's edge. Adventurers, scholars, and soldiers now flock to the serpent, delving inside for lost treasure in ruins. What mysteries and secrets are to be held in this destructive creature of centuries? It's time to grab our bags, our friends, and be prepared for everything. Welcome to Alvora Tactics. Alvora Tactics, released June 1st, 2017, is the second game in the lineup of Rad Codex's tactical RPG trilogy, which implies that y'all watched the first video in this, gamers. And what an intriguing opening, right? This unstoppable wilderness-devouring serpent causing terror for decades, just one day dying. What could have caused that? Is there something we can discover inside? So, no time to waste. Let's gather our crew and find out. I love the upbeat and adventurous music on the title screen. It pumps me up to go on an expedition. There's more options this time too, including camera scroll speed. And I always appreciated how there were different difficulties between enemy stats and AI decision making. I'd be willing to try a harder AI difficulty for the next game, but I do like the idea of normal, and having those uncommon moments where AI makes a mistake and I can do a cool play off of it. It will kind of lead to the defining moment of some of these games. I just don't know if that would be there on a harder difficulty. I was also looking at the Steam pages for these three games, and I noticed some things. Interesting enough, compared to the other two Tactics games, this one costs the least, which I think is important to note in terms of the scale of this game, and potentially how it reflects on the views of the developers that made it and how they value it. But also out of the three of them, this one has the most races to play as, so let's check out the character creation. Once again, we're making 4 characters. We have some familiar faces in terms of the XP boosting humans, the quick to act Scurios, the status resisting back dodging Razmin, the far moving Fareem, and even the tanky Buralk. A locked race from Voidspire shows up here as a default race. For new races, we have the Farron, which is what Jin was from Voidspire, boosting high magic defense and evasion. Falpa, these 4-eyed flathead gamers starting with a huge plus 10 to MP. Zyla, these lizard people that poison melee attackers. While Derry, these huge people with spikes on their backs, giving them more back defense, and both physical and magical attack up. Honestly, I never thought about it until now, but it might be a strat to end turns as a Walderi with their back turned to the enemies for that defense bonus, which is pretty interesting. Then we got my favorite race, Afest, which is what Ekrast was from the first game. These big people with horns, and they're just so cool. Super strong too, having both a physical and magical attack up, alongside a +1 movement speed. Wow! Which is wild. But they are really slow to act, and often won't be there to come in with a clutch. They're getting the least amount of turns in every fight. So with so many races, it might seem like a difficult decision on who the 4 I should roll with should be. But as it turns out, it kinda doesn't matter too much. It's kinda like the classes from the first game, which, hell, here I can't even change the starting classes of these characters until we get in game. I'll explain why players don't need to stress about their 4 characters too much this time, but here's the crew I'm rolling out with this time. but things will look a little different by the end. So here we are. In true Rad Codex fashion, I start out by scanning my teammates. I forgot to mention this in the Voidspire video, but the player can scan objects and people in the world to get all sorts of journal entries explaining weapons, lore artifacts. There's quite a lot, and it can also help with determining the weaknesses of enemies. But for now, we begin in the Serpent itself, playing out a small tutorial section with the help of our assistant, Lorem. One of the most relevant things we learn from this is understanding these bubble puzzles, involving connecting two blobs of the same color to make them pop. It will definitely be something we'll see later on, and some of them can be pretty tough. But after a short combat section, we take a hole back to town. The town serves as the main central point to prepare for future runs, and consists of several characters that can help us with various upgrades. Lorem Talks allows us teleportation shortcuts to Alvora and eventually sell some more rare items. Gavin in the barracks is where we go to rest our troops and recruit new ones. I'll explain soon. Please, just be patient, I'm begging. Zero the blacksmith is where we go to craft and buy weapons. They might be the most useful shopkeeper and where most of the player's money will go. Civil in the training area is also pretty important, allowing us to permanently upgrade parts of our troops from max party size to stat ups, and even retroactive XP sharing. Jonas the barkeep, oh so that's what Scurry will look like, gives us quests, which I really did like one of, but the bar does have someone more important I'll talk about later. And then there's our house. Whose house in particular? I don't know, everyone's. There's not much to do here, but there's a big bag of holding, and thankfully, the only bag in this game. So with what we have now, let's go into the beast. Well, I can lay out the gameplay progression of this game more in detail. Let's do this. As much as I don't like comparing, it would be easy to attribute the likeness of the gameplay loop of Alvora to that of a roguelike game. Or roguelite. Genres are goofy, and at the end of the day, language is just a way to convey meaning. Get caught up in the specifics and you all become lost. Nothing actually has meaning in this world. We give it meaning. What I'm saying is that Alvora is a linear progression of quote-unquote floors, each floor being different from one another. It's kind of a similar use of plot to Voidspire too, as Alvora has eaten many different landscapes, giving us a view of the different parts of the world. But from a gameplay perspective, it reflects on the player traveling as far as they can before eventually hitting a wall and escaping back to town, with newfound loot and money such as crafting kits, and the use of gold to buy better weapons, upgrade party members, party size. Trust me, money in Voidspire was nothing. In this game, it's everything, and hell no was I gonna bribe anyone or let anyone take my hottie dollar. But with these upgrades, alongside experience gained, I can go back into Alvora and hopefully make it farther this time. That description kind of makes this game seem a bit like a grind of just constantly ramming my head against a wall until I can get strong enough to make it farther. Which, yeah, I mean, I suppose, but that's kind of the point. But I think in some ways, the player can outsmart situations and come up with strategies to win harder encounters without just needing to keep raising stats. There is strategy, I mean, it's a tactical RPG. Though, speaking of which, let's crack into the battle system, yeah? So as y'all would imagine, fights in this game are incredibly similar to Voidspire, but it's been a bit, so I'll refresh ya, and bring up some more things I didn't previously mention. Encounters happen on screen and can be avoided quite a few times through negotiations and sometimes just walking around the enemies. Battles take place on a time bar system, with whatever character having the lowest time to act stat going first. Characters can hold 2 weapons, a piece of armor, and 2 accessories, and yes, shields count as weapons. Armor actually reflects on the character sprite, which is pretty cool, even if it can kind of mess with the color palette I'm going for, but it kind of enhances them too. On player characters' turns, they can move and act in whatever order. This game brings a number of improvements from Voidspire, such as an undo feature to roll back movement, which is much welcome, alongside showing spellcasting areas on the battle screen, which previously required highlighting the spell in the time bar. But battles are still about defeating enemies, looting their bodies, and gaining XP. XP is where the good stuff is at, Once more, the player is greeted with a surplus of classes to raise XP for, XP serving as a currency earned per class, used to buy abilities, passives, and stat upgrades. The familiar classes we know are all here, some receiving some minor changes and new abilities or passives to flesh them out. But there's also a couple of new ones. I sadly didn't get to experience a lot of them, but I did at least unlock them. Ignis Knight is a pretty neat idea. These fire knight people, and having a large focus on fire damage and causing havoc on the battlefield, damaging themselves and others by just exploding on people around them. Kinda sick if my whole team was made of Ignis Knights since they resist fire, but just one feels more like a hazard to everyone, which is kinda fun. Warp Blade sounds neat, but I didn't get to use it much. Defiler has some metal as hell descriptions that actually kinda disturbs me a bit. Like, nah, my homies are too pure for this stuff. But it's a good class for status effects, and it might be one of the best. Isn't it funny to think I'm 2 games in and I still don't know what the itchy status effect does? I think my favorite new class would be the Bat Handler. I feel like it's so rare for tactical RPGs to put in summoners, and honestly, that's because TRPG devs are cowards. Yeah, y'all heard me. Hell yeah, I'm gonna summon some big bats. The only thing that kinda sucks about this class is that the equip stats that come with the class aren't too great. But there's some sick skills. Attacking large groups of enemies, flying around, Tailwind is great, increasing the party's tile movement by 1. And there's some neat passives like charming monster enemies, and the one that deals damage to all enemies at the start of the character's turn. Like, whoa. It may not seem like much, but that's some pretty effective damage gain value. Especially if the player gets it on all their party members and come through with the stalling strats. But I don't feel like playing like a Pop-Tart. The fact that I'm recording for an audience helps, but I just normally like doing silly strategies for fun. So trust me when I say I came up with some wild strats with this game. On-map gameplay isn't anything too new from previously discussed. We're still dragging and pushing objects, and menu mania has been cooled down thanks to the inclusion of only one bag. It feels like there's a bigger focus on puzzles this time around, with rooms sometimes having push puzzles to give good rewards. So y'all may have noticed by now, my party members have been shifting around a bit. Well, let's head back to town, and allow me to talk more about the hub area. Money is limited, but it's generally useful everywhere. Crafting kits can be found in Alvora, and luckily get stored with the blacksmith so I don't have to carry around anymore. Masks can be found too, which unlocks a class for all characters, even newly recruited ones. There's actually a new system that I think is pretty major at the blacksmith. Weapons and armors now have augment slots for materials to be put in, giving weapons elemental attacks or armors more resistances. It's an interesting choice, because some of the materials could instead be used for new equipment entirely, and some equipment's main perk is having a lot of augment slots. This did make the inventory a little tough as I had to manage all these equipment pieces, and having to take off augment parts when switching equipment. Compare this to me just buying the next weapon tier and moving on. This can be a lot more cumbersome and time consuming, but it did lead to one of the coolest creators I've seen in a TRPG. Trust me, I basically invented a new class. And overall, it does allow for some cool customization. I was kind of surprised that putting the augment item on didn't consume it. It's not very committal, but this is definitely something that might be too time heavy for people seeking to optimize their gameplay, especially having to juggle all these items between all these party members. Which I think is a good time to talk about recruiting in this game. My homie Gavin's in the barracks, and they allow us to hire new troops, paying extra to get ones of a certain race. And this is why the player doesn't have to worry too much about the 4 characters they start out with, because they'll get more. So I know what y'all are thinking. Spacey, you dummy. Why do you need more than 6 troops, considering that the max party limit can be upgraded to 6, so why bother getting anything more? Well, here's the big changes. When a party member falls in combat, they suffer a max HP penalty. This happened in Voidspire 2, but it wasn't that dire because finding a place to rest wasn't too tough. But here, in order to remove this penalty, I gotta put them to sleep, having them rest while I go out with other party members. So when I come back, the penalty will be gone and I can swap them back in. I won't lie, I actually really didn't like this at first. It wasn't about the growth of my 4 party members going on an adventure. I was hiring randos and having to grind them towards something quick, dirty, and easy to learn with. There was definitely an attachment lost with this. But when I find something I don't like, I try to understand it and add a new perspective. I fell for the same mistake I said in my Voidspire video. I shouldn't have come in here expecting Voidspire, rather than experiencing and appreciating this game on its own. So what I realized is that this isn't a game about the growth and development of these 4 characters I make. It's a game all about creating the perfect sports ball team, having group members that excel in certain attributes like, oh yeah, that's my healer, number 34. It was like a fantasy team manager simulation. And I can see the value in having this squad that I can mix and match between, allowing me to see new synergies with certain characters. The use of XP sharing upgrades alongside masks to already have classes unlocked helps speed up the leveling process of newbies. When I looked at the game under the lens of a strategy RPG where I get to create the roster I can choose from, it starts sounding a lot cooler. So let me highlight a few especially noteworthy teammates I had. I managed to come up with some really cool stuff, trust me. Kulon, I believe, was the MVP, hands down. Spear-wielding tank, rolled mostly with Guardian Sage. Their healing wasn't great, but their defense and morale boosts allows me to have a lot more fun with my other characters. Just a very useful character to have around. I'm glad by the end I found these throwing spears. Always love these throwing weapons, as you all will find out soon. My Farron, Kezpin, was kinda just a class explorer, but it's where the bats got handled, though they ended up as a whip-wielding rogue mechanist. I just realized that the stat boosts from the starter classes are useful for more varying and non-specific gameplay. They played a weird game, running around and recruiting weaker monsters to help join in the fight, and having some decent item healing thanks to the first aid passive, very non-direct game plan, and of course the silly mechanist fun times we all know.
Yo, what the fuck is up?
Moldvi was my Walderi, and this gamer legit could move like 2 spaces per turn. Being a Spell Archon sharpshooter with incredible attack range with guns, alongside being able to imbue my attacks with elements, which usually just made them weaker, but it gave them status effects, so I could exploit weaknesses too. Once again incorporating that quick hand gun switching strat I found out in Voidspire, Nelopate, I know, my Falpa was weird, because they were supposed to be an electric mage, and had good electric area damage being a gatekeeper sorcerer, but my electrically infused bow just did more damage. Shoutouts to them dying like the second turn of the final boss fight and just lying down for the entire fight while everyone else actually did something. What a champ. The electric bow was also nice for sniping flare mines too. Healbon, my main damage dealer really. Basically my only damage dealer. Accidentally had them as a Spell Archon for the final boss, but I shifted between Blade, Berserker, and Warrior, rocking my favorite weapon, Dark Imbued Throwing Axes. It sucked in a way because I couldn't find much for skills that complemented my throwing axes. Skills would just use my fists or my shield instead of my throwing axes, so I mostly stuck to self buffs, and that's why they were a Spell Archon for the final boss. Because I was trying to see if I could, like, imbue the axes and throw them, but no. Kulon and them had some incredible energy. The low-key power couple Alvora never saw coming. With Healbon's Berserker buffs lowering their defenses, and them having passives that give them damage bonuses for morale increases, both which Kulon could help with. Then we have Sky. Erasmus and I hired, but never actually used in battle. I only brought them up because I thought that was funny. Moral support, I guess. But, and y'all know how much I like butts, but my final party member I used is one of the funnest characters I've used in a TRPG. And I came up with it all on my own. I created a new class, I promise. So, I found these 2 light stones that could be placed on a weapon. One would give the regen status effect when I strike someone with that weapon, and the other one would heal the target when I strike someone with that weapon. Thusly, meet Tingle, the Sage Sharpshooter. And I know what y'all are thinking. I can hear y'all screaming, "Wow, Spacey, you did Sage Sharpshooter again?" And no, it's not like that. I put those stones on the bow, and my main healing method was shooting my teammates. I made sure to pick a weak enough bow so that the damage was negligible, and to also not raise Tingle's bow skill whatsoever, to get the least damage and the most healing. What's amazing is how well this synergizes with the sharpshooter skills. Both far shot and multi-shot give benefits of longer range and multiple targets at the cost of dealing less damage, which means I could use these skills to not only heal and give regen to several party members or ones farther away, but it also did less damage so I could heal more. God, what a fun as hell character. This has to be one of the funnest healers I've ever used in an RPG, which is wild because I mean pure healer. Their offensive capabilities were throwing hands and that's it. At points, I had them resort to being a bat handler to summon and give them stuff to do. Which is surprising because I'm all about the healers that can still fight. Like, what kind of wild world am I living in where during a boss fight, I'm using one character to recruit random minions and using the other to shoot these minions with my bow so I can heal them? Like, I'm barely paying attention to the boss, I'm trying to raise an army in the back. This is the defining moment of Alvora to me, and shows how free-form these games can be, as long as players are creative enough. So overall, I had a pretty colorful cast of characters, but y'all may have seen a problem. I named 6 party members, excluding Sky, like pop off Sky, but you weren't on the battlefield. And that's because that fantasy I portrayed with the roster of characters to swap between just isn't the reality. It's just make 6 characters that are capable and just use them. If they fall and suffer the HP penalty loss, then go on a filler run with the other party members, leave as soon as possible, and then go back to the main team. Party members can actually die, but that requires running from a fight where they fall in, which there is never a situation that is worth it. So as long as players keep their main 6 alive, there's no reason to seriously use anyone else. Like, I don't know, I'm already juggling 6 characters' inventories, class progression, and my plans on what to do for them. So having to sleep some to start remembering more characters I haven't touched in a bit, like, crap, maybe this is just a fantasy sports ball manager, I can't handle all these people. It's just too much of a bother to be worth it. And I think the real kicker to all of this is that Alvora just isn't very interesting. Excuse me for the comparison, but in roguelike games, the appeal is running through the same dungeon over and over, but every time new events and the like occur to catch the player off guard. It creates such a mystery to the place we're exploring. But Alvora is legit the same every time. It just feels like one smaller dungeon players would see in a bigger game. Like, sure, the battle rooms are randomly generated, but it's still the same battles against the same enemies at the same time. And the side path treasure rooms never reset, they're limited. If the player has been there, what they did would still have occurred, just leaving the area empty. It makes this place feel small when I explore areas I've already been to, and it didn't take long for this to start happening often. The most interesting thing to happen are these Ignis Knights showing up. Their leader, Kavor, was so cool. They were funny as hell and had a sick flame sword the player can get from beating them, which they had to do twice. It was like a reoccurring character. The fight against the Ignis Knights was cool too. They had no fear of blowing up everyone around them. They constantly attacked through teammates just to hit me, but their teammates had high fire resistance, so they were winning these trades. They had nothing to lose, and their super reckless gameplay made for such an interesting encounter. I think these are the toughest fights in the game, and after dealing with them and getting the Ignis Knight mask, I almost kind of wanted to replicate that power and become one myself. But from what I learned, these events to get these masks only ever happen after I already unlocked the class, so I could have missed this fight entirely. I just wish there were more characters like Kavor. That was a legit interesting event that caught me off guard. As the game progresses, we learn that we need to push Alvora into the ocean in order to save the world, which, Yeah, it sounds wild, but it's what happens. And this amounts in a fight from people who heard news that we were going to destroy the serpent full of secrets and treasures, and they want to stop us from ruining their lives. There was always a cool aspect to Alvora in the form of going to the bar and talking to others. This hub town isn't ours. It's a spot for all adventurers to chill at, and while laws and such are still in place at the town, as soon as we enter Alvora, all bets are off. Nobody has to know what occurs in there. The idea to talking to other people in the bar, under the idea that while we're friendly now, we may have to fight to the death if we meet in the serpent, was kinda neat. Though I did see Morin again. They were one of the first merchants we met in at Voidspire. And see, I wasn't worried for them when I got out, because they knew the land, been living there for a while, and honestly they were a merchant, and in RPGs we know the merchants are secretly the most powerful characters, so I knew Morin would be okay. But my girl Olivia, I think it's time I gotta let her go, man. Morin had a lot of cool items, but I kinda just beat the game before I could beat any of them. Like, a part of me feels like I beat the game too early. I struggled a lot on the tentacle encounter, but besides the Pillbug Crusade later on, I kinda swept through the rest. The mechanic turret was super helpful on the final boss, and I will say the boss fights are pretty fun. I thought the final boss was great. It's just when I finished the game, I don't know, I didn't really feel anything. I'm not even sure if I missed pieces of lore, and I'm still not even sure why Alvora died. After all these centuries, y'all are telling me it just bonked a cliff and died? Goofy. It's funny to think in the grand scheme of the world of these games, how small of an event this was. This world-devouring serpent finally dies, and a month and like 2 weeks later, some random group of people show up and just push it into the water, and that's it. I guess the smaller price point compared to Voidspire said it all, but this is just a small experience. Like, walking from the beginning of this game to the end without taking any shortcuts and skipping encounters would probably take like 5 to 10 minutes, which, considering how easy it is to avoid encounters, it's not the hardest thing to do. Like, I didn't even bother buying shortcuts because I knew I could just walk around everything. It doesn't take long. I still think the game is good. I'm not going to 100% repeat all my praise for Voidspire, but it still rings true. The class switching and overall gameplay is still fun. There's just not much to the actual world this time around for me. Though I did like the water area. That music choice was a bop. Once again, the player gets some neat unlockables for beating the game. 2 races in the form of the defensive Crub, and once again the diecast, perhaps forever relegated to that of an unlockable race. Their HP benefit even got nerfed this time too. Give my mans a break, let him be in the mainline cast for once, yeah? Alongside XP multipliers, a super hard difficulty I'm curious about, and once again the retro visuals. But, yeah, that's Alvora. For people looking for a fun little tactical game with some procedurally generated elements and larger focus on gameplay over narrative, then yeah, this is fine. It still has a lot of room for creativity and variance to how the player can handle encounters, but I personally feel like the potential is not fully realized on a world that's just too small to contain it. It's like putting on a pair of pants that's just too big. Who the hell writes this? What I'm trying to say is that Alvora Tactics is a good time, but even as a more gameplay focused game over narrative, I think it could have used more. The lack of variation having impact on gameplay leads to Alvora Tactics feeling more like that part of an RPG where I get stuck on a dungeon and I have to keep grinding, leaving, healing, and going back in until I finish it. But the RPG I'm stuck on in this situation is still fun, so I don't entirely mind it. I'd still say it's worth playing, especially if someone is looking for a quick express shot of a TRPG. Just don't expect anything world changing. But if y'all are interested in going through these trilogy of games, then I can see this as a pretty nice interlude step between Voidspire and Horizon. It's breezy. But, with all that in mind, I think I'm ready to move on to the finale of this trilogy, Horizon's Gate, in which I will reveal the secret of why I decided to look at these 3 games to begin with. I don't know what I'm going to be getting into, But I'm pretty intrigued after seeing the differences between Voidspire and Alvora. So if this game catches y'all's eyes or sounds like something that would be fun, then check it out. Links in the description. But as for me, I'm about ready to set out for sea. So I'll catch y'all later when I look at Horizon's Gate.